And on that trip, our wonderful guide was Hisham. And so we got well acquainted with him and watched how knowledgeable he was, and it was just great. Hisham was born in Cairo and been living there ever since. He has been educated at the University of Cairo. He's a historian and Egyptologist. He's been doing lectures in England as well as in Egypt and now in the United States. He's writing to the law. And Hisham, love to have you here, and
thank you.
we have a lot of competition.
Right. Once again, good evening, everyone, and I'm really glad to be here. I know that maybe not a big crowd today, but I understand that there is a bit of competition in the city at the moment. I'm really honored to be able to talk to you about different things concerning my country. I mean, I'm in love with this country, and I don't know what can I do to help the country and to increase the number of tourists coming. And we are doing great actually in Egypt at the moment. So I hope that what I'm doing here might give a very good idea about Egypt, and it will encourage you and help you to understand about the country, and maybe encourages you to come and visit us one day. We discussed yesterday art in ancient Egypt. Today we are going to talk about the evolution of construction, how construction was developed year after year and generation after generation. Again, we have to understand that the main concept in ancient Egypt was the second life. The second life was the base of everything in ancient Egypt, because they realized that this life is short and will come to an end sooner or later. So they need to prepare themselves for the afterlife, which will be eternal life. So life started in Egypt, maybe much earlier than we can even think, because in a place called Al-Fayoum, which is like a little oasis, about an hour drive south of Cairo, we found some little tools used by the early Egyptians in the Nile Valley for hunting. And these are some pictures of the hunting tools they used about like 1 million years ago. So 1 million years ago, yeah. This picture actually is for some of the tools, and it is displayed in England, in Oxford, in Ashmolean Museum. It's not in Egypt, that's in Ashmolean Museum. And you can see actually the time, it's like between 1 million and 10,000 BC. So this is kind of the period of time when the Egyptians, or the people who lived in Egypt, were very much like Bedouins. They were traveling all around. They were looking for water, they were looking for food, they were fighting for survival, and they used to live in caves, which is, as we talked yesterday about cavemen in different parts of Egypt. Egypt is mainly desert, so what happened within this period, that the Great River Nile started running from south to north, coming from Lake Victoria in Uganda, in East Africa, covering all the distance, which is about more than 4,000 miles, all the way down to the Mediterranean. So all of a sudden, those who lived in Egypt at that time, they realized that they have now a current supply of water. There is no need to travel and look for water or look for food or whatever. No, they can actually have the current supply of water. When the Nile comes in a great inundation every year on the second half of July, flooding the banks. As you can see some pictures here showing that even the area which is by the pyramids of Giza used to be flooded. And this is not an old one actually, that's not painting, that's a picture. Yeah, that's a picture taken, we're talking about 19th century. Many of the pictures were taken by the early European travelers to Egypt during the second half of the 19th century and early 20th century, before building the dams. The dams were built on the Nile in the 20th century. The earliest one was built in 1904, which is the Aswan Dam, and then later they built the High Dam in 1960s. So even an area like the desert of Giza, where the pyramids are, and these are the two statues, or the two closest statues of Memnon, which is located on the west bank of the city of Luxor, the west bank of the Nile of Luxor, and it's desert. Maybe one day we'll go there and see it. It's just in the middle of desert. And you can see that even an area like this used to be flooded when the Nile comes in a great inundation, which was the main irrigation season. And by the way, the day when the Nile comes in a great inundation was the beginning of the Egyptian calendar. Yeah, and the calendar had like 3 seasons, each one of 4 months. So the first season was the inundation season, which is also irrigation season, and then planting season, and then harvest. So everything is related to the river Nile. So they realize now that they have current supply of water, they have a wonderful life, they can live by the Nile and the banks of the river, and they can learn the first lesson of stability, which is agriculture. Yeah, because now they are not traveling, they can be based somewhere, they can grow crops, and so they don't have to depend on hunting. No, they can also become farmers, and that was the beginning of farming in Egypt. We're talking about like 10,000 BC. That was even before Egypt was united, because Egypt was divided into upper and lower, and I will show you this on the map later on. But anyway, even before Egypt was united, they started agriculture, and that helped a lot in building small communities like little villages. And this is a picture of one of the villages. It's not that old, but it's old enough. I mean, it's not like 10,000 years old, it's like 3,500 years old. This is the only example we can have actually from a village, because the problem is when they were building things for their first life, they didn't want to waste time building things of stone or whatever for this life, and they know that sooner or later they will die and leave it behind. So they focused on building things for the afterlife of stone. But for their houses, even the palaces of the pharaohs were built of mud bricks and wood. Mud bricks and wood, and you can see here layouts of one of the villages. That's the village of Deir el-Medina, which is also on the west bank of the Nile in Luxor, which is the workman's village. That's like a close-up look of the village, and you can see the design of the houses, like very small houses, very narrow streets and so on, like living all together like in a very close community to protect themselves, because it's like almost by the edge of the Nile Valley and near the desert, so they need to be well protected. So that's if we talk about the daily life buildings, houses, palaces of the pharaohs were all built of mud brick and wood. While when they thought of the afterlife, they had to believe and think also of super creatures, what we call gods or deities, and they believed in them to protect them in the first life and to guide them into the afterlife. So to worship gods, they had to build houses for those gods, the houses of the gods, what we call now temples. And because they believed in the afterlife, they need to keep the body intact for the afterlife. They need to store all the equipment they might need for the afterlife intact, jewelry, name it, everything. So they built tombs, or the houses of eternity. So the tombs were called the houses of eternity. So they built them because they meant to last forever until the afterlife, and they didn't know how long they will need these buildings for, so they built them of stone. So this is how the idea was developed in their mind, building houses of the gods, houses of eternity of stone, building their daily life houses and villages of mud brick. And Egypt had enough and sufficient amount of mountains, providing different kinds of stone, mainly limestone, and second priority was sandstone, because it's not as good quality as the limestone. But if the limestone is not available in the area where they were building, so they go for sandstone. Mainly in the north or in Lower Egypt, they were using limestone, like building the pyramids of limestone, the tombs of Saqqara of limestone. But when we go further south, like near Luxor and even south of Luxor, they were using mainly sandstone, which is they were very practical. They didn't have to travel a long way to get the stone. They were looking for what's available in the area, and they were using it for building their tombs or their temples. This is an example of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And here you can see a great map of Africa, and you can see the sources of the River Nile coming from here. That's Lake Victoria in Uganda, and going all the way down to the Mediterranean. By the way, this is an artificial lake. This one here, the Lake Nasser. It's south of Aswan, and that's created after building the high dam. The Lake Nasser is the largest artificial lake in Africa and used to be in the world until China managed to build a bigger dam than the high dam only a couple of years ago. And obviously the artificial lake of the Chinese dam is bigger than this one. Now this one is stretching, as you can see, between Egypt and the Sudan. 350 kilometers in Egypt, 150 in the Sudan, to be the most famous lake in Africa, artificial lake, and the biggest reservoir of water for Egypt. Here we can have just a map of Egypt, and it shows the Lake Nasser, that Aswan, where from we got the granite, and transporting it all the way down the Nile. Here is like a view of the western desert. As you can see, just desert, but little oases here and there, these green spots. We have no oasis on the eastern desert because it's mainly Rocky Mountains, and it's like the extension of the Red Sea mountain range. So between the Nile Valley and the Red Sea, just mountains, and not mountains like here, not green mountains. They are very yellow, and it's just rocks and desert. Not even possible to live on the East Bank. They could live on the West Bank because it's almost flat, and there is, as you can see, some sources of water. So the green snake, I would use this terminology like a snake river. That green snake was the Nile Valley, and this is where they started settling down and started their civilization by the river. When they thought of the afterlife and they wanted to protect their bodies or their mummies, when I say bodies I mean mummies, because mummification was invented to make the body dry, so it make it last forever, or at least for a long time, and they need to protect those mummies and the treasures as well. So they built the tombs. They were very primitive tombs, and the tombs were built of mud brick and wood at the beginning. We're talking about like 3000 BC, at the beginning of the Egyptian civilization. Why I'm calling 3000 BC the beginning of the Egyptian civilization? It's actually, to be more precise, the beginning of the written history of Egypt, the beginning of the pharaonic history of Egypt. Yeah? When Egypt was united, the north and the south, upper and lower, became one country, and the king who was sitting upon the throne was known later as a pharaoh, and the word pharaoh is derived from the word bir'u, pharaoh, pharaon, pharaoh. Bir'u means the one who lives in the big house, if we translate it exactly from ancient language to English. So it's the one who lives in the big house. Indication he's the ruler, he's the richest person in the country, and the pharaohs ruled Egypt from 3000 BC until the Greeks arrived with Alexander the Great, 331 BC. Yeah? So that's what we call pharaonic Egypt. Later we call it Greco-Roman Egypt. Right. So at the beginning of the written history, because we call it the written history because that's the time when the language was established, the hieroglyphics. as a language was established or constructed and start to be used to describe their first life, their daily activities, and their beliefs of the afterlife, God's rituals, and all these things were written either on papyrus or carved on the walls of tombs and temples and so on. This is where from we learn about ancient Egypt. So they used to bury their dead underground, which is quite normal, common, yeah? So they used to dig a shaft, and at the bottom of the shaft was about 15 to 17 meters, about like 45 to 50 feet deep, and at the bottom of the shaft is a very primitive burial chamber, where they lay down the body or the mummy in the form of a fetus, to be ready for the rebirth for the afterlife. Okay. And it's not safe because the shaft is open, so they had to cover the shaft somehow. And they built something like a big step or a big bench above ground to hide the entrance to the shaft. It's what we call mastaba. Yeah, this is mastaba. We'll be using this terminology a lot in the coming part of our session. Mastaba is an Arabic word, and this is a mastaba, which is like a little sofa. Yeah, the villagers can sleep on it or sit on it at home, and the locals in Egypt were calling those buildings mastaba. So the early travelers to Egypt, when they came to Egypt, and they didn't know what are these, so they were described by the locals. Those are mastabas, because it looks very much like the step or a bench that they have at home. So the word was taken from the locals and was used to describe the early buildings of tombs in Egypt, which was built of mud brick and wood. Okay, that was again 3000 BC. It's a colored plan of the mastaba, as you can see, and some of them were like family tombs, so they had like 2 burial chambers and have like 2 shafts, as you can see. Not until 2700 BC, when King Zoser came to the throne, about 2700 BC, and he was a very famous and very special king. He hired and employed and assigned one of the most genius architects of the history of mankind. His name was Imhotep. Wanted to build something very special for his pharaoh. Show off his work, show his intelligence, and also show his respect to the pharaoh and to make him different from the other kings before. Okay? From 3000 BC until 2700 BC, the tombs of the pharaohs were built in Upper Egypt, in the south, in a place called Al-Qom Al-Ahmar. This one. Here. It's not, you see Luxor, that's the Valley of the Kings, so this is where they built the early tombs, yeah, of the kings from 3000 BC until 2700 BC. Egypt was divided into 2 halves. I think I have the map here. Right? We can imagine this line here, and this part will be Lower Egypt, the north, and that's Upper Egypt. When Egypt was reunited, the king of Upper Egypt invaded the north. So the first king of the United Kingdom of Upper and Lower Egypt was Upper Egyptian originally. So all his followers, for the first 2 pharaonic families, they were building the tombs. They lived in Memphis, but they built the tombs in Al-Qom Al-Ahmar. Not until King Zoser came to the throne and he decided to build his tomb in Saqqara, which is part of Greater Cairo. yeah, near the Giza, here, and Saqqara was 3 miles to the west of the city of Memphis, which was the capital of Egypt. Well, something very important we need to know about building in ancient Egypt. They were inspired by the sunrise and the sunsets. They were great observers. They were sitting and watching. They were respecting everything in this life. Respected the river Nile and tried to explain that magnificent phenomenon, how the Nile comes in a great inundation every year, and they believe that the Nile god is using the key of life, which is the key of the Nile, and opening the gates of the river Nile to let the Nile comes in a great inundation and giving them life. That's why they call the key of the Nile the key of life, which is the Ankh. Yeah, all right. They also noticed that every morning there is a sunrise. The sun rises on east, and they could see it traveling from east to west, and then it sets behind the mountains of the West Bank, disappears, gets dark, nighttime, they didn't know where did it go. And then the following morning, the sun is born again. Strange. So they thought about it. They said, this is life and death. So the sunrise is life and the sunset is death. It is exactly what will happen to us when we die. When we die, we'll be traveling in the underworld until we reach the east, and then we'll be born again for the afterlife, and we'll be traveling from east to west. So they use the east bank of the river Nile for living. So they build their towns, their cities, everything on the east bank, while on the west bank was the side of the dead, where they built their tombs and their mortuary temples. But when the first king of Egypt invaded the north and built the city of Memphis, he was obliged to build the city of Memphis, the very first capital of Egypt, on the west bank. And why is that? Because he couldn't trust the north. He couldn't trust the people in the north. They're still enemies. Yeah? So he built the city of Memphis on the west bank, which is very well protected. From the east is the river Nile. From the west is the vast desert, and it's very difficult to invade from the desert. From the south are the supporters, the southern people, and he can only protect and defeat the enemies might come from the north. Yeah? So the city was very well protected, and it was a very strategic location. It's an exception. It is an exception, the city of Memphis. So when they built the necropolis of Saqqara, it should be on the west bank, so it was only 3 miles to the west of Memphis. Okay? So Imhotep, the genius architect, thought about building something special for his king, and that special thing became later on known as the Step Pyramid, or to be more precise, we call it the Step Mastaba. You remember the Mastaba? So it's the Step Mastaba because it's not a pyramid yet. How? I'll explain that right now. That's the plan of the whole complex of King Zoser, the Step Pyramid. We'll come to talk about it in details, but just to give you an idea about the location. Alright, back to our lovely Mastabas. That's the Mastaba here, that's the original Mastaba. Yeah. After he built the Mastaba, as usual, the only thing different was 3 things actually, different from the earlier tombs. Number 1, the size of the Mastaba was much bigger than the size of the earlier Mastabas. It was like 10 meters high. Number 2, the shaft underneath was much deeper than before, was 27 meters, not 17. Number 3, which is the most important of all, was the material used was not mud brick, was the first time in the history of mankind using stone, limestone. for the very first time he used stone in building that massive building of Saqqara. Okay. So he built the mastaba and he surrounded the whole area by an enclosure wall. Okay? Enclosing the whole area of the step pyramid. And it was 10 meters high. The early Greek travelers to Egypt described the complex of King Zoser built by Imhotep in Saqqara to have a great wall surrounding it, and the wall had 14 doors. 14 doors. But very strangely said that 13 out of the 14 doors were false doors. The only real entrance was this one. The little entrance, as you can see, very narrow entrance. Because not everyone was welcome to the complex. Why do you have 14 doors then? 14 doors to be exactly the same number and the same look like the palace of the Pharaoh in Memphis. But if they needed 14 doors for the palace, which is used on daily basis, they wouldn't need the same number of doors for the palace of the afterlife. But here they need to have more control on the people coming in and out. So it was a very small, narrow entrance, as you can see. Right? So after he finished, we were trying to read his mind. Imhotep, that genius architect, he went outside the complex, but he couldn't see his work. The mastaba is hidden behind the wall. Yeah, that wall is almost 10 meters high. So it's as high as the mastaba. So it's almost hiding the mastaba behind. And the guy was gaining like self-confidence. He was trying and making mistakes and learning. So he decided to enlarge, to add more mastabas to be higher, so we can see it over the distance from behind the enclosure wall without getting in. So to add another step on top of the first one, he had to have an extension to the mastaba, enlarging this mastaba, and made it bigger so it could sit another one on top. The other one on top was also 10 meters high, but was smaller in size. Okay. Issue. So far he had nothing in mind about pyramids. He's still focusing on mastabas. He's adding another mastaba to the first one. So that's the original plan, as you can see. Right. Now he has a second mastaba. And then he got more confidence, and he decided to go for two more steps. The second one and the third one and the fourth one. So that was the old original plan after changing from mastaba to a pyramid shape. Oh, I'm doing great. So why not making it even bigger? Yeah. So he had extensions to each one of those mastabas, as you can see the yellow extension here, to make it much, much bigger than before. Ended up by having 6 steps. Each one of them is 10 meters high. So total height of that step mastaba or step pyramid is 60 meters in height. Okay, we cannot call it a pyramid. It's wrong what's written here. But we're using the word pyramid because it's well known. Yeah, but we should call it actually step mastaba. So when you meet somebody and would like to tell them about the lecture or your trip to Egypt, whatever, I always tell my groups in Egypt this: when you go home, tell your friends that the Egyptian civilization started step by step. Yeah, makes sense? So, I mean, when you read a book about the pyramids and the magical power of the pyramids, and aliens came here and built pyramids and stuff like this, don't believe it, because this is how it starts from scratch. They were building like very simple primitive tombs or mastabas, and they changed the material, and then they made the mastaba bigger. They added another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then they got the form of the pyramid later on. So this is the plan, as you can see from inside. By the way, the step pyramid or the step mastaba is suffering a lot from natural causes, and it is strongly threatened. The site is closed. I mean, inside the pyramid, you cannot go inside the pyramid, and they are now covering it from outside with new blocks of limestone, trying to protect it as much as you could, because I mean the quality of stone is the first time to use limestone in history of mankind, like 4,700 years ago. So they couldn't actually choose the best quality of stone. So it's very poor quality. That's why it's falling apart at the moment. So here we have another plan of the pyramid 1 and pyramid 2, and that's the shaft and the burial chamber, very much like the other mastabas, but it's bigger in size. That's a new picture of the extension. And here you can see that's the first mastaba, or the first level, and here you can see the extension of the first one to fit the other two. You can see how poor the stone is. Yeah? Very poor actually, not like the Giza one. Giza is definitely a better quality. And here is like a picture of the whole area of the grand or the great court. Well, ladies and gentlemen, because religion was a very important thing in ancient Egypt, we don't expect the king to build this beautiful, magnificent, great complex just to be his house of eternity. It has to be used also for his daily life. So that complex of King Zoser was used for some religious festivals and some political festivals. I always get these questions when people come to Egypt and ask these questions, because you read about Egypt and sometimes you get the wrong source. And they come and tell me, we've heard that the Egyptians used to bury their servants alive with them so they can serve the king in the afterlife. No, that's wrong. It happened in other parts of Africa, but never in Egypt. And we have in the Egyptian Museum great collection of little statues made for their servants, because they believed in the king as a god king. So when he comes back to the afterlife, he can point out those little statues and make them real, so they can come as servants in the afterlife and serve him again. So there is no need to bury servants alive. Okay. Another thing is, we've heard that they used to kill the tomb builders after they finish building a tomb, so they can keep it as a secret. Wrong. And we have also very good evidence of the builders of the pyramids and their villages, and the builders of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings and their villages. Okay, one more thing that people get wrong about Egypt is that we've heard that they used to kill the king after 30 years from coming to the throne. No, wrong. It happened in other parts of Africa, but not in Egypt. It was common for the tribal life, when they have a chief of a tribe for 30 years, they must kill him in a big festival. He knows that. He knows that he's going to be killed in that festival if he lives for 30 years as the chief of the tribe. Okay, tribal life, they need someone strong to lead his people, and also to fight the other tribes and to lead them hunting and to protect them and so on. So as he's getting old, he cannot do this, and it seems that the community couldn't accept the fact that this guy will resign and sit quietly until he dies. No, we kill him. So attending this festival would be his successor, could be his son, could be younger brother, could be his cousin, could be whoever in the tribe. And when they attend that festival, killing the old chief, so the wisdom of his soul will be transferred to the body, the young body of his successor. That happened in Africa, but not in Egypt. But Egypt is part of Africa, so definitely it was influenced by the African traditional life. So the pharaohs, after 30 years from being pharaohs, they had to have a festival, a political festival, let's call it re-election. The king is inviting all the representatives of the different provinces, and I would always say that the Americans would understand this more than any other nation, because before the American election, you have the candidates traveling all over the states, and they meet people and so on, tell them about their program and what they promise and so on. So the same thing. The king, the pharaoh, was inviting the governors, the mayors, the high priests, and the elites of the society here and there, inviting them all to a big festival so he can show them that he's still young, he's still strong, he's still able to lead the nation for another 30 years. So come on guys, elect me for another 30 years. Yeah? So that open court, that great court, was mainly used for that particular festival. So here, this red arrow is showing where the audience were sitting, watching the king performing. So the four corners, the king would go, one of the rituals, that the king would go to each corner, he will go here first, and then being crowned, and then running to the next one, being crowned again, and then here and there, 4 times, the 4 corners of universe. So he is elected not as just the king of Egypt, but the king of the universe. And at that time, Egypt meant to them the whole planet. They never expected somebody else living on this planet. It was only Egypt and the Egyptians. They only realized that there are some other people when Egypt was invaded by the Hyksos. Only then. But before that, nobody lives, it's only us. Yeah? So we don't know anything about anybody else. We care about Egypt, so the king was elected as the king of the universe, or the whole planet Earth. Okay, we noticed before we leave this slide, we noticed here that the pharaoh's tomb. Here, we found or discovered the shaft, and it is 27 meters deep, as deep as the shaft underneath the pyramid. And it was a big question mark. Why do we have 2 shafts? We remember now that King Zoser was the first king to build his tomb in the north, because his ancestors built their tombs in the south. So he was the first one to move his tomb to the north, and he was worried about losing the supporters, claiming that he is now more loyal to the north or to Lower Egypt. So he built like 2 tombs. One tomb here under the pyramid, which is the northern tomb, and this south tomb or the southern tomb to like make everybody happy. Yeah? Right. What to put in the 2 tombs? We have 2 main things, as important as each other: the body and the canopic jars. What are the canopic jars? They are alabaster jars, like among the collection of Tutankhamun, and they are containing the internal organs of the king. When you do the mummification, they take everything out of the body, leave only the heart, which is very important for weighing the heart and the feather, for knowing if he was good or bad, and they take all the organs like livers, kidneys and so on, and they put them in those jars. So those are could be more important than the body. So Carter, when he discovered Tutankhamun, was really annoyed because he couldn't find them. He found the mummy, he found gold, he found the golden mask, he found jewelry. So where are the canopic jars? He was not satisfied until he found them in a side chamber. Okay, so we strongly believe that he used one of the shafts for the mummy and the other shafts for the canopic jars. Okay. We get back now to the entrance, and we're still talking about the first building of stone ever. So definitely they had very strong influence from the time before, when they were building of mud, brick and wood. So the entrance is very narrow to control the number of visitors and the quality of the visitors as well. Not everyone was invited. When you go through this little door, I'll take you minute by minute inside now. So if you go through this one and look at the ceiling of that little tiny corridor, that's the ceiling here. Yeah, it looks like a wooden ceiling, because before building of stone, They were building of mud brick, and the ceiling was wooden ceiling, made of logs, wooden logs, yeah? But this one actually is built of stone. This is limestone. And it's formed in the same shape of logs, because this is what they know. Yeah, this is how it looks like. So they had no other plans or no other designs. So they formed the stone to look very much like logs. Amazing. It's really amazing. When you see it for real, it's beautiful. After this little corridor,